in populations, among individuals and within populations, that contribute to change in the future population gene pools and therefore contribute to evolution. And so over long periods of time, a population of organisms exposed to a single environment will often evolve due to adaptation, maximising the fitness of individuals in that population, or the continual evolution of species that also inhabit the environment, that therefore have flow-on effects across the community. So ecology is the scene and the setting for these long-term evolutionary processes to take place, and it's a crucial way of thinking about the relationship between these two main, hugely fundamental bodies of theory in biology. And so just a quick example of what I mean here. I spoke in the previous lecture about the interactions between the introduced cane toad here and the red-bellied blacksnake. And we could, take a couple of snapshots in time in terms of studying the biology of the snake in relation to the interaction of the toads and the evolutionary adaptation that's happened in the snakes. So toads were introduced prior to 1940. I think it might have been around 1925 or so. And this is just a few snapshots of years since, showing how the distribution of those toads has spread across the continent. And primarily, the toads were initially introduced at a number of points along the coast there to control a species called the cane beetle, which is a pest of sugarcane. Of course, the toads were completely useless at controlling the beetles, which exist in the stem of the sugarcane, and maybe a metre and a half of the ground. So they were completely inaccessible to the toads, but the toads certainly have ecological impacts in a whole number of ways. And one of them was that they proved to be toxic and deadly often to red-bellied blacksnakes. Red-bellied blacksnakes, prior to 1940, we had to take a snapshot of that species then and studied the ecology of it as it existed, sometime before cane toads were introduced to the country. Then we might have recorded a distribution like this, and a widespread range, obviously, and a high abundance across that range, with this species inhabiting all swamp and marsh habitats. And we would have, at that point, described its ecology, its foraging ecology, as focusing primarily on small and large amphibians. These snakes, that's how they make their living primarily, living in swampy areas, feeding on a range of different things, but in much of their diet was contributed by frogs in their immature and adult stages, and the larger the frog, the better in terms of a nutritional reward for the red-bellied at that time. Now, since then, we had the introduction of the cane toad, and the cane toad spreading throughout this range. Cane toads proving toxic to the snakes, and particularly the larger toads were likely to cause the death of a black snake that ingested that toad. They could, the snakes would become severely affected and quite ill with ingesting smaller toads, but those events wouldn't necessarily prove fatal to the snakes. So that was the selective environment that happened. That's the evolutionary play that's played out then over, let's say, the previous, up until 1980, or up until the present time, you could imagine. And against that background of a new ecology, we had evolutionary adaptation acting on snakes. Natural selection was imposed on them by the presence of toads, and it has subsequently led to various different changes in the biology of the snake, such that if we were to take a snapshot of the biology of this red-bellied black snake in 1980, then we'd find a very different ecological picture than what we had in 1940. And that would be that the distribution of the snake has changed and the abundance of the snake has changed. This graph's not entirely accurate. It's one essentially that I've just included and made up to make the hypothetical point, but certainly the distribution and the abundance of the red-bellied black snake has changed over the many years since cane toads were introduced. But let's say, for argument's sake, that it looks like that, such that they were more abundant then, or this species became primarily abundant and distributed in the cool temperate regions of Australia, away from the coast, and they were very selective in their use of swampy and marshland habitats. We would find now that snakes are less predatory on amphibians, and particularly larger amphibians, and particularly in their northern range, as a consequence of snakes that were less likely to prey on large amphibians being evolutionarily favoured.
This rest app makes it super simple to choose my investments.
Have eaten cane toad,
I wonder if
and therefore evolution favouring those genes and adjusting the population level behaviour of the species. And the other thing that we would find these nowadays, particularly, is the fact that these snakes have evolved morphologically. Their head is relatively small for their body size, and this is thought to be a direct result of natural selection against snakes that were able to ingest large toads. So there is evidence, strong evidence, for morphological change in the snake as a direct consequence of the presence of those toxic cane toads that are eaten when they're quite large, likely to kill those snakes. So this makes the case, I guess, that yes, we can take a snapshot of the species and document its ecology. At a point in time, at that point in time, the ecology of that species determines the potential ways that evolutionary adaptation would happen, and that process would happen over time, leading to a very different snapshot So there's some further reading here. There's a paper here by Rick Shine. Rick Shine is a very prolific Australian biologist and has a particular interest on reptiles, amphibians, lizards, snakes. This is probably the most recent major review that his group has published on the ecological impact of cane toads here in Australia, and he talks about their interactions with black snakes at some depth, so you can check that out if you would like to. And now, without really much further ado, I will pass this lecture over to Linda Beaumont, who will tell you guys all about the wonders of population ecology.
Hi everyone, welcome to Bio 1310. My name is Linda Beaumont, and today I'm going to be talking to you about population ecology. We will be looking at populations and their characteristics, the movement of populations and what distinguishes migration from dispersal. And then in the second part of the lecture, we're going to be talking about research, which focuses on responses to climate change. Population ecology is a branch of ecology that explores the dynamics of populations of species and how populations interact with their environment. In other words, this area of ecology is interested in the relation